mother was always frustrated on our car rides home from school. My lunchbox would always come back full, perhaps only a piece of fruit that I nibbled on during recess. Otherwise, the delicious home-cooked Pakistani lunches that she had always packed me so early in the morning were untouched. This sucked because, well, I loved my cultural food. It was good. So, obviously, when I came back home, I would devour fresh parathas and handmade curries, and my mom always knew my favorites. Palak paneer, a spinach dish, chicken korma, a spicy meat curry, and butter chicken. And on weekends, I looked forward to delicacies that took longer to make, but it only made them that much more special. My favorite is biryani, a chicken and rice dish with potatoes, which is a very important distinction to me. Perhaps this story is one relatable to many. In its different reiterations, it's the same message. We ran from the foods we loved just because they were different. It wasn't until years later that I found out my mom packing me this food was part of a larger picture, which eventually led to me pursuing food and nutrition in university. And now, a fourth-year dietetics student, I am passionate about exploring the relationship cultural food has in overall well-being amongst immigrant and BIPOC communities, its ability to connect individuals together and shape identity. If there's one thing I've learned through my schooling or my extracurricular activities, it's the power of storytelling. So I'd like to take this time today to thank my family and friends for trusting me with their stories and photographs and allowing me to share snippets of themselves today. Whether we think about it or not, food tells stories, from the people who grow it to the people who cook and serve it, all the way down to the people who eat it. Arguably, my favorite part. So whether we think about it on a daily basis or not, food has the ability to connect others. Think about it. What role has food played in your ability to socialize and gather? How do you connect or catch up with friends? Is it over dinner or coffee? The stories my mother shared while I watched her cook in the kitchen were invaluable in understanding who she is and where I came from. Through the aroma of cumin seeds and cardamom were conversations about how she grew up and learned to cook, and I frequently overheard her phone conversations and consultations with her older sisters, asking about how to cook certain dishes properly. I watched her go through the process of estimating ingredients using only her hand and never a teaspoon or a measuring cup, and how fascinated I was at her ability to eyeball ingredients and still put forward something so delicious every single time. I'm fascinated at her ability to use leftovers or other ingredients that may go bad soon to create new dishes, and she creatively sneaks in vegetables, but I can always tell. This mother-daughter bonding is an intimate moment that can't easily be replicated through a phone call. One of my friends shared that as an international student, she looks forward to returning to her mother's cooking, but more so is excited about the time that they spent together in the kitchen. It is a private sanctuary, separate from the rest of the house, where she and her mom are able to bond. She sits on the stool, frequently used by her mother to gather ingredients, and watches her mom roam around the kitchen to make food for the family. Instantly, they break into conversations, start exchanging laughter, and share secrets. Despite all of the changes and the growth that they faced while she's away at school, the kitchen is consistent in its nature. It's the place where they provide each other their undivided attention. Food is a product of our mother's love for us, and food is also a means through which people around the world celebrate. Food is a product of our mother's love for us, and my mother's love is evident in the cut up fruit and nuts that she brings me while I'm cramming for an exam, or when I'm having a particularly rough day and I just am surprised with some baked treats. Food is also a means through which people around the world, like myself, connect to extended family. We gather over elaborate and beautifully smelling lunches and dinners, and I realized that when I visited Pakistan a couple of years ago, food was a means through which I was able to establish relationships with aunts, uncles, grandparents, cousins. We laughed about our childhoods over lunch and dinner and listened to our parents talk about theirs. Certain dishes became attributed to certain family members because it was their specialty, like my uncle's refreshing mint lemonade or my aunt's homemade peach ice cream that she'd whip up herself. And the list goes on. Snacking on biscuits and drinking chai as we watched TV was a routine evening activity for my grandparents and I to spend time together. One of my Iranian friends recalls that for her, walnuts are the embodiment of family bonding. Long-distance relatives come together and harvest the walnuts, and they all together sit down on the ground in the farmhouse and crack them open. Young children watch as the adults peel through the difficult shell and feed the kids. It was the ultimate act of service. Being fed a walnut was special because you knew the amount of time went into picking it. Food is also a means through which people around the world celebrate. Certain foods can be used to signify certain moments, and certain foods are cooked at certain times. My coworker shared that during Novena, the 9 days leading up to Christmas, she and her family would visit different relatives and spend time at their homes, cooking food, eating together, singing, dancing, and praying. For me, dates are significant because it's a universal representation of how Muslims around the world break fast, especially during the holy month of Ramadan. And preparing iftar, the meal eaten after breaking fast, it becomes a family activity. My dad and I are in charge of the fruit salad, while my mom makes homemade samosas or other special treats, and my brothers are in charge of making the drinks and setting the table. And then we all come together. The month signifies family, community, and worship, and the foods encapsulate these feelings. Furthermore, food is a means of continuing or creating traditions. Another one of my friends shared that when she visits Tanzania frequently, her entire extended family gathers at a very specific pani puri stall. It's a tradition that they can't seem to part from. And for me, the tradition of getting a box of mithai, South Asian sweets, every Eid taught me a lot about shared favorites because all of our hands would go towards the same type of sweet in the box. And yes, shamelessly, I admit that I have cried once when my brother took a sweet that I had my eye on. Traditions are unsaid agreements between people to engage in the same activity every single time. And when we're no longer there for those traditions, it becomes a longing for the bliss of eating a particular food to feel the comfort of being with those particular loved ones. And we can't forget about nostalgia. Food has the ability to bring about nostalgia. When returning to a very specific Pakistani cookie that I loved as a child, I'm instantly transported back in time to when I was much younger, dipping my cookie in milk for a little too long every single time, and then being disappointed every single time when half of my cookie had drowned. And of course, my mother used that opportunity to always say, "I told you so." My friend from Brazil shared that her grandma makes a sweet pierogi filled with a purple date compote topped with whipped cream. And whenever she has this recipe now, whenever she has this snack now, she's instantly transported to all of the summers that they spent as a family at the beach, enjoying her grandma's handmade delicacy. So, food is more than just fuel. It's how we connect with each other, mark milestones, preserve culture, and translate knowledge. Now, back to the lunchbox. What was I denying myself when I refused to eat the fresh biryani in my lunchbox at school? First off, good food. I was hungry. Secondly, it wasn't a good feeling seeing my mother upset when her efforts went to waste. But most of all, back then, the little girl didn't know that she was giving up the ability to understand a huge part of her identity. She was giving up the familiar smells of cumin and garam masala, and the scent of these roasted spices had conversations intertwined through each step. Years later, when I started studying nutrition, I found out that giving up one's normal dietary pattern could be part of a larger process called acculturation. Acculturation, frequently experienced by immigrants, is the process of giving up one's customs, values, or beliefs to adapt to the new culture or country in which a person belongs. And I didn't know it then, but giving up one's dietary habits is also part of acculturation. This was what I was attempting to do. One of the ways acculturation can affect food choices is by exposing immigrants to new foods that perhaps are not part of their traditional cuisine. This can include fast foods or convenience foods, and the intake of this has shown negative impacts on health. One study found that US immigrants gradually lost consumption of their cultural food, which led to lower fruit and vegetable intake and higher fat intake. Another scoping review done on Canadian immigrants shows that dietary acculturation led to an increased risk of chronic disease. Acculturation can also impact one's emotional and mental well-being. One study found that long-term immigrants, those who have resided in their new country for many years, feel more pressure to adapt to new norms. And a different study found that there's often an internal conflict in individuals who are struggling to uphold the values of their native culture while adapting to the norms of their new country. Traditional foods help alleviate stress by providing the comfort through a sense of familiarity. It allows one to connect to their heritage or homeland. One study found that international students prefer home-cooked national foods because they are emotionally comforting, healthy, and tasty. And this all works to reduce homesickness. Hopefully by now, I've convinced you of the importance of cultural food, especially when it comes to maintaining overall well-being. So, let's talk about what we can do to reduce dietary acculturation. There's many factors that impede a person's ability to keep practicing and making their traditional foods. This includes financial challenges, the availability of these traditional foods, and the affordability of these ingredients. Unfamiliarity with grocery stores and a lack of awareness around Canadian nutrition discourse further adds to the problem. Nutrition professionals are often unaware of the different traditional foods out there and their benefits. So there needs to be a greater push to provide training that will allow dietitians, healthcare professionals, or other people in the nutrition field to be able to administer culturally appropriate and relevant nutrition education. This should be done in collaboration with communities because healthy eating can only happen when people are actually eating. Public health professionals can also advocate for more diverse cultural food options in schools or hospitals. Providing culturally appropriate food in hospitals has shown for improved patient outcomes, reduced hospital readmissions, and has also helped reduce healthcare disparities amongst low-income newcomer populations. In schools, providing diverse food options improves student attitudes towards meals, encourages them to try new food, promotes awareness of new cultures, and an understanding between individuals from different backgrounds. It's also correlated to increased fruit and vegetable intake. Next, improving food security efforts in these communities empowers newcomers to consume their cultural foods. Subsidies, food assistance programs, and community gardens all improve the access and availability of cultural foods, enabling cultural continuity. But Abeera, that takes so much time. So let's talk about some individual takeaways. What can we do? First, try shifting your judgment around different foods and use that as an opportunity to learn. Instead of asking, ew, what are you eating? Ask people about their food nicely, consider tasting new foods, and learn about where they come from. Learn to cook the food that you grew up with, because the passing of these recipes in these communities are often done verbally, not documented on paper. Measuring spoons, cups, and scales are not even used as a reference. So, what will happen to these recipes when the people who are cooking the food and inherently translating these stories are no longer able to make it? To prevent the loss of intergenerational knowledge and grandma recipes, it's imperative to spend time with your elders to learn how to cook your cultural food. Next, we can hold space for conversations about food around food. As a university student, you can share with friends what you grew up eating with family, share the memories that you have associated with foods, your likes, your dislikes, and all the stories that are not talked about enough. Last, socialize, gather, and celebrate around food. I personally am a fan of potlucks. Bring to the table food close to your heart, food that speaks about your background and your complex identity, and allow your circle a little snippet into the stories that make you who you are. Because food is more than just a plate. Thank you.